Hello everybody, I'm Chris, and today I've been asked to give a quick, short summary and overview of Volume 1 of the revised Hardy Boys stories, a book known as The Tower Treasure. And just to give you a little bit of background, this volume here was published back in 1959. It's the first volume of the revised Hardy Boys stories, which were published between the years 1959 and 1979, and consist of 58 volumes. This being the first, published approximately 60 years ago now, but still very popular and very widely read by many people, here in America at least. So I'm going to give you a quick summary, as I said, some of the major points, some of the major action. This being the first book, it really introduces all of the main characters, all of the essential places, the town of Bayport, for example, the Tower Mansion being one of the focal points of the Bayport community. It introduces the character of Herd Applegate, who will appear later on in another story, volume 11, as a minor character, a story called While the Clock Ticked. But first, we're going to just jump into chapter 6, because this is really where the action begins in terms of the core mystery related to this story, the robbery of the Tower Mansion. But first, a little bit of warning. This video has spoilers for the book, so if you haven't read it yet, go read it and then continue with this video. Okay, so I'm not going to give everything away, but I will mention a few things that might lead you to spoil some of the surprises. So, in any case, let's begin. Chapter 6. So, excuse me, chapters 1 through 5 basically cover some introductory material, sets the scene, introduces the characters, including Chet Morton, his sister Iola, and their friend Callie Shaw, of course. And the first 5 chapters really revolve around the actual introduction to the story, as I said, but also the first few chapters are devoted to the Hardy Boys expressing a desire to solve a mystery on their own. And one of the first things that happens is that in the story, Chet's jalopy, the queen, is stolen, and this becomes the Hardy Boys' quest to relocate his missing jalopy. And this puts them on the trail of the major criminal in this case, who will be identified later as a character by the name of Red Jackley. And he's nicknamed Red Jackley because he's known to be a hold-up man and a thief, and generally a career criminal, but he wears a disguise. And one of the disguises that he wears in his robberies and in his nefarious schemes is a red wig. So he's been nicknamed Red Jackley by the criminal underworld. So he is the one who is ultimately found to be responsible for the lifting of Chet's jalopy, which is then recovered in a field, I believe, in the woods near Bayport, in a clearing. So Red Jackley is then involved in attempted holdup of a boat ferry ticket office, as I recall. And this is how the Hardy Boys get on his trail, through this attempted robbery of a ticket agency. I think it's for a ferry service. And then later on, so that's pretty much what happens. Very quick overview, chapters 1 through 5. Later on in chapter 6, the real crux of the story happens because Herd Applegate's Tower Mansion is robbed. Okay? And this news spreads all over Bayport. The Tower Mansion has been robbed of $40,000 worth of jewels and securities. So $40,000 worth of jewels and securities are stolen by some unknown person. So now it becomes known throughout the town that the primary suspect of the robbery is a guy by the name of Henry Robinson. Now, he is an employee of Herd Applegate, the owner of the Tower Mansion, and this rich aristocratic individual who lives in the Tower Mansion with his sister. But Henry Robinson is, as you see here, the Tower Mansion's gardener and caretaker. He works for Herd Applegate. He and his family live on the Tower Mansion grounds and have been employed by Herd Applegate for a number of years. Now, how do the Hardy Boys find out about this $40,000 worth of jewels. Well, as a matter of fact, the day that they hear that the robbery happens, they go home and they actually meet Heard Applegate coming out of their house because, of course, Fenton Hardy, their father, is this world-renowned and celebrated private investigator. So actually Heard Applegate came to the Hardy's house to request Fenton Hardy's assistance in finding the real suspect, the real criminal who robbed him of his treasures. And of course, at that time, the Hardy boys catch wind of it, and they go with Heard Applegate and their father to the mansion to investigate the scene of the crime. And on their way there, that's where Heard Applegate voices his suspicion of his gardener, Henry Robinson. Because one of the main things that he has for evidence or suspicion of evidence is that Robinson is the only one besides himself and his sister that knows or has seen the safe being opened, and therefore could have seen the combination or learned the combination that way. And then also there's a mysterious deposit in his bank account of $900 the day after the robbery, or the morning of the robbery. I mean, the morning after the robbery. There's a $900 deposit made in his bank account, which he does not disclose where he got that money from. So Heard Applegate suspects that this is part of the treasure that was stolen, and he used that to deposit in his bank account. So that's the gist of what happens in chapter 6. After that, Fenton Hardy and the boys sort of have this ongoing investigation. Sometimes the boys are working by themselves. Sometimes they're working with their father. Their father is helping them out. The boys are really interested in solving this case on their own, but they need their father's help here and there. Fenton Hardy gives them a sniff of a clue here and there. But the main reason why they want to solve this crime on their own is because Heard Applegate himself has offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to the capture of the criminal and also the return of the stolen items. So the Hardy boys are really out for this $1,000 reward. But they can't, get off the ground without Fenton Hardy's help. So he offers them some assistance. They accompany him to New York City on the trail of Red Jackley, and they visit some theatrical group where one of the actors had a wig stolen from his dressing room several years earlier. They track down the wig maker, and all of that takes place after chapter 6. So chapter 6 through chapter 17, 18 is really where they're on the trail. They're trying to clear Henry Robinson's name because they have a friend, Slim Robinson, who was a high school friend of theirs. He has to quit school and get a job to support the family because once the word got around that Henry Robinson was accused of stealing all this money, Applegate fired him, and then he hasn't been able to get another job in Bayport, so he has to go to other towns looking for work, and he hasn't been able to find a job. His family is now living in some kind of shack outside of Bayport, on the outskirts of Bayport. So they really feel sorry for this plight of this family, so they're trying desperately to solve the case, clear the father's name, and so Slim can go back to school and the family reputation can be restored. All right, so let's jump ahead. So on the trail of Jackley, after Fenton Hardy and the boys go to New York City to investigate the wig and try to track down, the wig maker and who stole it and how they get on Jackley's trail down there, Mr. Hardy actually learns where Jackley is, and he follows him, and eventually what happens is that Jackley ends up in because he was someone who worked for the railroad companies as his primary occupation back in the day. So he knows the railroad systems in and around Bayport and New York. So Fenton Hardy tracks him down through the railroads system, and he actually is on the chase with Jackley at one point. And this is all reported action after the fact, but Fenton Hardy reports that Jackley was on the run, and he was on his trail, and Jackley was on one of these railroad handcars, and it flipped the tracks, and Jackley was seriously injured, and it was expected to die. So before he dies, Fenton Hardy, obtains a confession from Jackley. The doctor calls him when he suspects Jackley is about to expire. So Fenton Hardy flies out to New York, to the hospital at the last second, and gets a confession from Jackley. And one of the things that Jackley says is that he hid the loot in the old tower. Okay, that's a very key line, and it's a little bit cryptic, but he thinks that Fenton Hardy thinks, and the boys think, that the old tower that he's referring to is the old tower on the Applegate estate, because the Tower Mansion has two towers, the original tower and then a new tower which was constructed by Hurd Applegate, many years later. So they think it's a reference to the old tower of Tower Mansion. So they go to Tower Mansion, they search the whole towers, both towers, they search around the property, nothing, they can't find anything. So they're totally perplexed and confused as to what he meant by this old tower, and if he didn't hide it in the old tower, why would he lie? Because he's about to, meet his maker there. So what does he have to gain by concealing the truth? So the Hardy Boys eventually have this brainstorm that, well, maybe we should investigate more about Jack Lee's background on the railroads around Bayport. So he goes around and they investigate his various haunts in his railroad days, and then they are on the tracks and having some lunch near this town outside of Bayport, and they notice in the distance across from them there's a nice shiny new water tower, and then somewhere close by there's a second water tower, which is an old looking, decrepit, dilapidated, broken down water tower. And they have this brainstorm that, well, maybe Jack Lee was referring actually not to the Tower Mansion, but to the water towers here where he used to hang out on these railroad lines. So here's what they do. They find the stolen goods in the old tower, the old water tower. They climb this rickety ladder, get up to the water tower, get inside the water tower, and they find this whole collection of junk and railroad ties and beams and all this stuff from those railroad days. And underneath a stack of these beams, they find a satchel with the tower treasure inside. So they find it in the old water tower, is the point. But just as they're about to exit from that tower with the goods, there's this railroad hobo that comes along, a very, malicious guy by the name, he calls himself Hobo Johnny, and he traps Frank and Joe inside the water tower. And I won't give away the rest of the ending, but eventually, you can say safely that good triumphs over evil. All right, so this is the first in the series of the Hardy Boys, and again, hope you read it. It's a very good story. It's one of the better examples of the Hardy Boys stories in the revised series, the one that really kicks off the whole thing. So those are the two most important chapters in the story. So hopefully you get a chance to read it. Like I said, you will enjoy it, I think, and investigate it on your own. That's about all for now. Thank you for watching.